This is Reconciliation March. Let's give Jesse Jackson Jr. a round of applause and a microphone. You're gonna take it, big guy, because we love you, and you know what? We need you. Now come on up here. I'm gonna step to the side, and my big brother. I appreciate that. Listen,
One second, let me take it. I'm gonna take this.
Thank you, Yusuf. Dad, always a pleasure, and to see so many brothers and sisters here. Reverend Moss, I'm so proud of you, and Father Flager. Let me first begin by associating myself with everything that Van Jones had to say, with everything that Reverend Sharpton has to say, and for the leadership that he has been providing. Please give Yusuf a great round of applause for pulling everybody together. I was coming from King Drive when Dad called me and asked me to stop by, and so I didn't have any prepared remarks, nor did I know what I was stepping into. I would just make 2 points that I think do matter for the longevity of the collective effort. First, maybe 3 points. First, this is about as good as church will ever get for me. To see all of the pieces of the social gospel come together in the form of what we heard today. I understand the Black church experience, but this meeting here that Yusuf has helped organize and is the organizer of is just good religion. It's just good information. And it's hard for me to imagine that there's a meeting of clergy anywhere in the nation like this, because they just devolve into a spiritual patting on the back. I want to make 2 points. One, the movement requires a goal so big, so high, that it is virtually unobtainable in order to sustain itself. That's what Frank Watkins and I concluded in 2001 when we wrote A More Perfect Union. When I say a goal so high, every Democratic convention or every progressive convention or every right-wing convention, we have these temporary, contemporary, spontaneous issues that are driving the body politic, but the goal itself is not sustainable beyond that election. What makes our faith so strong is the infinite nature of God. That the birth and crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, for those of us who are Christians, has sustained us for 2,025 years. And it could very well sustain us for the next 2,025 years. So when the Heritage Foundation is no more, when Justice Powell, who is now part of the ages, is no more, when Project 2025 is now Project 2026 and 27 and 28, we have to have a goal so big that we are sustained even when there's not a new threat to who we are as a people. I've yet to hear that goal. We've not presented a goal that large and that wide, right? So Frank and I argued that we ought to throw out several constitutional amendments in 2001 that seem unattainable. All citizens shall enjoy the right to a public education of equal high quality. Platform item number 1. We may not get it in 10 years, we may not get it in 50 years, although one amendment was added to the Constitution in 100 days, another amendment was added to the Constitution in 10 years, another amendment to raise congressional salaries took 200 years to accomplish. The point is, they are goals that cannot change. And the first point about Powell and others arguing against the Department of education is that the word education is not in the Constitution. Now, to get a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the states. Well, that ain't no local organization. That's an organization in every single state in the United States. We start with the problem and work our way back to the goal to determine the scale of the organization that has to be built in order to sustain the goal over time. It takes 2/3 of the Congress, 3/4 of the states to amend the Constitution of the United States. I get it. Obamacare was here while Obama was president. Obamacare is still present. Donald Trump is coming after Obamacare. Some form of Medicare and Medicaid. That's what Al Green stood up in the Congress and said with his cane. You're not elected by a mandate, and you want to cut Medicaid. But the word health care is not in the Constitution. So you have a constitutional right to get shot because of the Second Amendment, but you don't have a constitutional right to check into a hospital and get health care of equal high quality after you get shot. So you need a goal in the right place to sustain the movement over time. That's true of the God of Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, David, and Jesus. That's true of the Christian experience for the last 2,025 years. Trying to be like Jesus requires a goal that you can almost personally not obtain, but you try. Are y'all walking with me? Now, let me just close on this little constitutional point, which I try to make on the limited platforms that I have. The First Amendment says freedom of speech. It does not say Sun-Times, Tribune, New York Times, Time Magazine, LA Times, Dallas Herald. It doesn't say internet, billboards, outdoor advertising, AM, FM, Sirius, XM, Roku, Xfinity. It doesn't say all that the First Amendment covers, but the goal is so large that it covers our entire way of life. I can't begin to tell you how many jobs there would be behind the amendment, all citizens shall enjoy the right to health care of equal high quality. We would be producing more doctors in this country than we're producing anything else. In fact, we'd be exporting doctors to the world under such an amendment. Nurses, anesthesiologists, anesthetists, physical therapists, because all citizens shall enjoy the right to health care of equal high quality without the specifics. But the most important part of the amendment is to Yusef's point. The second part says, and the Congress of the United States shall have the power to implement this article by appropriate legislation. In other words, states' rights does not work. And only the Negro can bring forward this message. I'm saying that because the first 10 amendments, specifically the 10th, where they take everything, as Donald Trump and others are saying, turn the power over to the states, every Negro in America ought to react every time they hear that, if they understand the history. When they took and shut down Roe v. Wade and gave us the Dobbs decision and turned the rights of women over to the states, everyone who's ever experienced slavery ought know that the Negro's rights were in the states. Until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments determined that slavery and states' rights are one and the same. States' rights cannot be human rights if you can justify separate and unequal and states' rights in the states. So the Negro overcomes states' rights with the human right not to be in slavery. Chattel. Chattel slavery is illegal in America, but wage slavery is legal. Turn it over to the states. That minimum wage is different than that minimum wage, which is different than that minimum wage, and different than that minimum wage, different than that minimum wage. That health care in that state is different than that health care in that state. That environment is different in that state than this environment. All slave systems until we build a more perfect union. Are y'all with me? Now, I just want to close on this. I asked Dr. Jamal Bryant on my radio show the other day after I finished listening to Pastor Moss preach about what happened to Jamal at the White House when the Republicans were holding up them signs and you were talking about in that sermon that we're all under attack. I asked him what was the number one reason that the black church is losing its prophetic voice. He said, well, the scholars might disagree with me, and y'all know Jamal's voice. He said, the scholars may disagree with me, but I think there are three factors in that. He said, first of all, the 501c3 status of the church. There's not a pastor in here who wants to lose it. That affects your voice. And Remedy, when he said it, he said 3 years ago the IRS ran through and raided my church. He said my church is still struggling from post-RIS raid syndrome. The IRS, the 501c3 status. He said number two, don't nobody want to go through what Jeremiah Wright went through. You don't want to be the one pastor that they string out here in the context of your prophetic ministry. Then he said the third thing is they've convinced some folk that Donald Trump is the second coming of Jesus Christ and told you to keep your church out of state's business. You keep your church separate from the state. Now, I realize there's some technical things that we need to do specifically in terms of our knowledge of what Van Jones has said and the leadership of Reverend Sharpton and others who are really, really engaged in this at the street level. And so this is a high-level conversation we're having here at Push today, and I'm going to take my seat. But I want to be really, really clear, now that I'm on the radio for a minute, there's a huge gap between what we're talking and what we even allow to hear on the radio. Our people calling in, they ain't talking about the stuff we're discussing today. You see, this thing that we're fighting for, those of you all in internet land and joining us by stream, it has to be down here in a language that has something to do with the price of eggs. You see, we can know all of this stuff, Dr. Parsons, but down here, when you're asking somebody for a vote, it matters. My truck broke down in Philadelphia, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Yusuf, I need to be reimbursed for my truck breaking down on the highway campaign. I forgot to tell you about that. My truck broke down in Pennsylvania. I had to spend 3 days in Harrisburg. I was in the lobby of the hotel, the only African-American couple who was there watching a football game. Philadelphia Eagles or the Pittsburgh Steelers. But when them commercials came on with that transgendered member of the LGBTQ community dunking on that little girl right there, it drew more ire than the whole football game. I had Don Lemon on my show and I asked him this question, because Don is a gay male. He was very careful. He said, I understand the LGBTQ human rights because I'm part of that dynamic. But some of this we shouldn't be leading with. Y'all hear me? We can't lead. I'm not anti it. I'm for your civil rights. But we can't be painted by the other side as all of our civil rights are about all things. Y'all not walking with me. Y'all not walking with me. Because I come from the red, yellow, brown, black, and white, we're all precious in God's sight situation. I'm with that. And I understand that the Civil Rights Act of '64 started and was fought for from Jim Crow through Emmett Till, through Rosa Parks, who said, I was thinking about Emmett Till when I sat down on that bus. And then Dr. King came to her rescue at 26 years old. And I understand how the Civil Rights Act of 1964 came into existence. And yes, it dealt with race, but it also dealt with gender, and it also dealt with women. And so the struggle that we lead has almost always been about ourselves. And the legislation that we passed included everybody. I'm not anti-DEI. I am, as Yusef said, for our fair share. If we get our fair share, everybody else can have what they're entitled to. Just give us ours. We're going to fight for everybody, but we must be motivated by the fight for ourselves. They ain't coming after everybody. They're coming after everything they paint black. Thank y'all for having me.